Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Corona. Welcome to my live today. And today I just wanted to start off on soul and spirit. I'm the founder of soulandspirit.net, a daily spiritual and meditation practice program. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got here. So, one of the things that I do that is different than every other meditation program is the foundation of the meditation program that I've created, that I've built, that I present to you is based in spiritual principles, in a foundation of spirituality. And that comes from over 50 years that I've had in studying many different spiritual traditions: Hinduism, Sufism, Native American Lakota spirituality, esoteric Christianity, and in this breadth of different spiritual practices. Because I started this whole journey, or this journey found me. This journey, the spiritual journey, mystic journey, found me. And it found me as a very young person, probably 5 years old. I was 5 years old, and I had turned 5 years old in April, and I was going to kindergarten in August, September. And I had gone to Sunday school, Catholic school, and so I was very attuned and loved Jesus and Mary. And I just loved them. I loved everything about them, and spoke to them and talked to them a lot. And so before going to school that spring and summer, I did not want to go to school. I did not want to start kindergarten. And so I started praying, talking. My praying was like talking to Jesus. And I was asking him, why do I have to leave my house? Why do I have to go out and do something different and go out into the world? And I listened. I listened very deeply. And as a 5-year-old, I didn't think I couldn't hear God. I never thought I couldn't hear God. I never thought that would be something unusual, not to get an answer back. And I did get an answer back. And the answer was, so going to school, I said, well, why do I have to? And what I heard was, you have to go into the world because there are things you need to learn. And so I said, what am I supposed to learn? What am I supposed to learn in my life? And the answer was, you need to learn compassion. So I was 5 years old. I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what that word compassion meant. And I went and asked my mom, what does compassion mean? And she I remember the look on her face, even all these years later. And I don't remember her answer, though. Whatever her answer was, it didn't satisfy me, because I waited until I could read, to go into the living room where we weren't actually really allowed to go, to open this book. It had these doors that were hard to open. And I went to the dictionary, and the dictionary was huge. It was one of those really big dictionaries. And I went to the dictionary and I looked up compassion. It was hard to spell I think I was in second grade at that time and had learned to read and write to a degree. And I looked up compassion, and I still didn't know what it meant. It did not satisfy me. But I knew that that's what my life was meant to learn. So I knew that's what I was meant to learn. Of course, I forgot that as life went on and I went through school. But it came back to me later in life. And I remembered the conversation with Jesus really clearly. And I remembered very clearly that was the lesson I was meant to learn in life. I learned it when I got cancer, and I was at a cancer clinic, MD Anderson in Houston, and my heart was so deeply touched by so many people and their families that I saw down there. And I would just feel that in my heart. For them, they taught me that. So I learned it. I was 53 when I got cancer, and I had just turned 5 when I heard that the lesson for my life would be compassion. So it took a lot of years. And I'm still learning it. But I embodied it more as a living understanding, a living acceptance in that seeped into the foundation of my very existence when I had cancer. And I was grateful for that experience of going through cancer, because I was fulfilled then in what I came on this planet, in this life, in this classroom called Earth, fulfilled in the one lesson I was meant to learn. The other thing I did at 5 years old was I asked, that was what I was meant to learn. And then I asked, what am I meant to do? And I heard very clearly, you are meant to be my servant. And what that meant to me at the time was I was meant to be a helper of the great Lord Jesus. I was meant to be a helper. I was meant to be a servant. Of course, I didn't know what that meant at 5 years old, but I was very clear that that was what I was going to choose for my life. The other thing that was very clear, and I don't know why at 5 years old, but I understood that I had an opportunity given a life. I understood that I was given a life, that this was a gift, and that I could squander it or I could make the best of it. I could ignore it and just get through life, which was like squandering it, right? I could kind of wreck my life. I just knew that somehow I could kind of wreck it. Or I could just make my life the best I could make it. And then the other question, when I knew that part, the third part of my daily conversation with God, with Jesus as God, as I knew him at that time, was that the way I would not squander my life was to be the best person I could be. I didn't know how to do that at 5 years old, but I decided to do that. I made that commitment. I didn't consider it a commitment. That's my adult word, but I made that choice. It's like, okay, I'm going to be the best person I can be. I know I have to learn compassion. And when I go out and I'm in the world, then I need to serve. And I don't know what that is, but I'm going to agree to it. So that came to me very early. The other thing that came to me in that same year of 5 years old, my family used to go to a lake, a wilderness lake in northern Colorado, about an hour from the Canadian border, beautiful, pristine lake and a gorgeous forest there. And we spent our summer vacations there. And since I was 2. So when I was 5, I asked my mother if I could go on a walk in the woods by myself. We always had to walk with our parents, me and my brother, and we'd go on vacations with my aunt and uncle and my cousins, my 2 cousins. And we'd always go together. But I asked, and I had asked probably since I was 4, can I go on a walk in the woods by myself? Now, no parent would do that in this day and age. But at 5, I was given permission to go on my own. So I went back into the woods, and I went on a deer trail. And I remember the birds were squawking and screaming, and I knew they were warning their fellow birds, their fellow bird family, that there was an intruder in their territory. So I walked really quietly and really slowly in really deep stillness. And I had learned stillness by going out in the fishing boats with my uncle and my dad. So the kids were allowed to go in the fishing boats when we could be absolutely silent and still. Because when we go out with my dad and my uncle, it would many times be at daybreak or at sunset. And they would say, if you make a lot of noise, talk, move your feet on the bottom of some of these aluminum or wooden boats, you're going to scare the fish. And so this was a great privilege to go out in the fishing boats. So I learned to be absolutely absolutely silent in the stillness of the breathtaking still morning. The lake would be like glass, and it would be the sound of the loons calling through the trees and their echoes, the soft breeze through the leaves. And it was magic and utterly beautiful. So I learned stillness. And on my walk that morning, my first morning walking on my own, solo in the woods, I knew how to be still until the birds accepted me in their territory and got quiet. And instead of a warning squawking, it was the music of the bird sound. And I remember I stopped in that quiet stillness and I looked up through the canopy of trees, of leaves, through the trees, and looked up at the sky and saw the clouds in the blueness of the sky. And I remember how strikingly beautiful that was. And then I thought, this isn't real. This is not real. I want to pull the sky back. I want to see what's behind the sky. There's something behind the sky. This doesn't feel real to me. And in that moment, the sky did part, and I saw the stars in the black. It was the middle of day, but I saw the stars. And more than seeing them, I heard them. And I heard this sound coming from every star to the other stars. And I saw a web of light from one star to another star to another star, penetrating back into the universe infinitely. And I thought to myself, what is this music? What is this web of light between these stars? And in my 5-year-old mind, what I said to myself is, they're singing to each other because they are friends. And what that meant to me was that they loved and cared about each other. And this was how they told each other that. And so I knew there was more than the everyday life that I could see. And what it was this beautiful symphony of sound and a beautiful matrix of light that connected everything and connected me. And my next thought in that moment was, do I have a song that reaches up into the sky, into the stars? What is my part? And I did reach out, and I inwardly, I said, well, I want to be a friend with the stars too. And I want to sing with them and let my song touch every star in its web. Because I knew that touching one would transfer through that great matrix that I could see of light, and that my song, my music, the song of my existence, of my being, would move through the web of light that was touching all the stars and planets and beyond. And that was my first time of having a spiritual, I didn't know it was a spiritual experience at the time. But when life went on, went to school, interestingly, this choice I made connected me with other children who had reached and thought about similar things, not exactly like I had, but had an expansiveness of their consciousness that was looking beyond the day-to-day life. And I had a friend whose name was Anne, and she also reached and looked for things beyond the everyday. And she brought everything that I'm talking about and all ideas of what is bigger than us back into a consciousness of God, but not a consciousness, not a God like a man, old man with a big beard. She was more expansive than that. And I had grown up Catholic. We'd had these long, at the corner, we'd walk from school, and before she went down her block and I went down mine, we'd have these big, long conversations about heaven and hell. She didn't believe in hell. And she, we were like 12, she died at 14 of spinal meningitis. She died young. But when she passed, we both worked as short order cooks when we were 15 at a restaurant called Lum's Restaurant. And we both got these jobs. I don't know how we got them at 15, but we did. And I went into work one day when I was 15, and she said, "You know what we've been talking about all these years, all our lives as children?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "I have the answer. I know the answer. You know, we were talking about the meaning of life. We were talking about the meaning of God. We were talking about heaven and hell. We were talking about our place in it." She said, "I have the answer, but I have a headache. I'll talk to you next time I see you. I'll see you probably tomorrow when I come in from work, and I'll see you then." And then she got spinal meningitis and went into a coma and died 3 days later. 3 days later, she died. I think she did find that answer that we had been talking about. Well, I know she did. She found that answer. And she left this earth early. Her time was done. But it set me on a course to look also for the answer. If there was an answer, she said she found an answer. So it set me on a course. But first, before I was set on that course, I got so mad at God for taking my best friend away. I was so mad at God. And I then denied him. I want nothing to do with spirituality, with the spirit, with God. How could you do that? I was a very angry 15-year-old. And what that did was like it put me in this desert. And what I learned later in life is when you disconnect, I mean, you can never really disconnect from the Creator. We're one with it. I know that now. But when I consciously put a wall up, put it like that, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to know God. I'm mad. I was living, it was desolation. It was utter desolation. And I got lost and in this life, didn't know where to go, was pretty miserable. Did some silly things in college, with drinking and things like that. It only lasted a couple years. And then I found my way back, or God found me and brought me back, because what happened then when I was 18 was strangely, everywhere I lived, I connected with a spiritual teacher. I didn't go out looking. It's just what happened. So the first one, when I was a Hindu teacher who taught mantra meditation, and I loved it. I felt this deep relaxation really in my body and my mind. And having a relaxed mind, it was just like I got tingles in my brain. And I said, "What is that?" And this Hindu teacher said, "It's your brain relaxing." And I wanted more of that, but the Hindu path was not, it didn't really connect and line up for me, but it was a taste of it. It was a moment of it. And then I moved to a mountain property, a ranch, and I lived, I have to check something out real quick. Oh, on my phone, spam, somebody trying to get me to, well, never mind. This is not important. So anyway, where was I? So next thing, Hindu teacher. I learned a mantra meditation. And what I liked about the mantra meditation, chanting inwardly as sacred syllables or sacred Sanskrit words, was it kept my mind focused on something so that my mind wouldn't spin into things I really, nonsense, into chatter and nonsense. I could come back to that mantra, but it didn't have that magical feel for me like I had felt in the woods way back when I was 5 years old. It didn't have that magnificence, this ineffable sense of wonder and awe. And it didn't touch deep into my heart to open my heart into loving. It was nice. It was physiologically and psychologically relaxing, but it wasn't transcendent. It didn't matter. I didn't have to go looking. Strangely, spirit came looking for me. And I moved to a mountain ranch, and I lived in this tiny little 2-room with no running water apartment above the barn. And in the big ranch house moved in some people that they followed Native American traditions, Lakota specifically. And they had a medicine man called Archie Fire Lame Deer come and do sweat lodges, pipe ceremonies, and they would come invite me. I was in college at the time studying science, and I went because after the sweat lodge ceremony, Inipi, it's called in Lakota, the Inipi ceremony, they would have a feast. They would have a lot of food. And I was a starving college student, and I went for the feast. And I was once again in awe going into a sweat lodge. None of it was in English. It was all in the Lakota language. These people that came, that were invited guests of the people that lived in the big ranch house, didn't speak English, or I don't know if they did. They didn't speak English to us. And so I didn't know really what was happening, but I knew what was happening inside of me, which was a deep reverence and sanctity for creation. Without knowing their words, I got the flow of the sacredness of which this ceremony was performed. And I felt different. The past, the anger when my friend died was gone. And I remember that first ceremony. I went to many that winter. Archie Fire Lame Deer medicine man from the Rosebud, I think. His father was dying. His father was John Fire Lame Deer. and he wrote the book Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. And he was dying. He was in the Veterans Hospital in Denver. So they came to do those ceremonies because those ceremonies are healing ceremonies. They're done for healing. Only then. They're not just do them. They're for healing specifically. And all that winter they came to that ranch. And you'd be so hot. The steam would come up from the glowing red rocks from the fire that were brought into this covered constructed out of willow bark round. It fit about 11 people all next to each other. And in the center is a pit, and the firekeeper would have a fire outside and bring those hot glowing rocks, and then they would pour water, and the whole floor of it on the earth was covered in a thick inch of sage, and that just aroma of the sage, and then you just sweat. And I remember that first one I did for 3 days. I walked around just completely in bliss, just deep. My body was deeply relaxed and felt so buoyant and vibrant and calm and at peace. In my mind, the thoughts were just simple and neutral. And I was just walked around in observation. No thoughts, no opinions, no judgments, just peace. They moved out after several months after that winter. Winter turned to spring. And into the main ranch house, some people that followed a group that followed Sufi traditions moved in. And their teacher came to visit, Rashad Field. And I met him, and what I knew of, I don't know, I was 19, mind you, 18, 19. And I didn't know anything of any kind of spiritual tradition, but I knew that I liked being around them. And they were really accepting, and Rashad Field, their teacher, who the group that lived there, the community that lived there, was very reverent, but I didn't know anything about him, so I wasn't reverent. I was just like normal, everyday 19-year-old, and he just got a big kick out of me and told me I was so independent as I made my own sweat lodge out in the woods, and would go and sleep out in the woods and do my own little sweat lodge after and Vision Quest. So I learned a bit from them. I learned the path of the heart, and I learned they were a tradition that followed the heart and followed a deep, reverent tradition of service to God, love of God, and listening for what I had heard as a 5-year-old, listening for that celestial melody. I found out later that some Sufis, and I'm not sure if they chant the word hu or hu. And that is the sound of creation. Some people know the sound om. They use the sound hu, hu. And it was beautiful. And I felt deeply touched by that opening heart, that deep love and reverence that they had for God. And my own love and reverence for God was rekindled. I was reconnected to my love of God, to my commitment, to my choice of service, and to my understanding that the way of life that was best for me was the way to be the best person I could be, and how to learn how to do that. And so the Lakota people started me again on that path. First the Hindu people, then the Lakota people, then the Sufi people. And finally, one day I knew I couldn't live in the mountains anymore. I loved it. I loved being in nature. I was akin. It was my spirit in nature. But I knew somehow that time was going to come to an end, but I didn't know if it really was an end. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. So I drew a circle. I walked out from my little apartment above a barn on this ranch next to the National Forest. And I went out in the forest and I drew a circle and I did a vision quest ceremony on my own. And I sat in a circle for 4 days, 4 nights, no food, no water. I did cheat. I brought a candy bar and I ate that candy bar during those 4 days. I brought a blanket and I sat in that circle for 4 days and 4 nights and prayed. Unceasing prayer. What's next? And I waited for a vision as I was told a vision quest is. And I got a vision. And it was crystal clear. And it was, you need to go back in the world. You are not learning anything about people. You can't stay in the mountains, on a ranch, in a remote area, by yourself, because you're not learning what you're meant to learn. You have to go to the city. But you will, and they gave me a promise, you will be able to come back one day. You will be able to live once again amongst the trees and the forest and in nature. And so I did. I packed up really pretty quickly within a couple of weeks. And I moved to downtown Denver. And I worked as a fashion model and made a living doing that, and for a number of years. And that led to me working on volunteering for a person's personal feature film project. And I got put in the makeup department and I learned to be a makeup artist. And then I traveled to Japan and Europe as a fashion model, and I got to see part of the world. And then I got to, I had to go into the world and seek my fortune. I was poor. I was very poor, just scraping by during those years. I quit college. Eventually, when I was done with traveling the world, I came back and I worked as a makeup artist in film and television. And then I learned to be a script supervisor in film and television. And then later after that, I did work in Los Angeles. I was brought out by a couple of producers as a script supervisor. And just that, all those years compressed, I realized I didn't want to live, although I didn't want to live in Los Angeles. I was a Colorado nature girl, forest, trees, rivers. And so I opted for a smaller life in the film industry. And during that time, before I went traveling the world, I met a teacher named John Roger. He was also a sound current teacher, just like the Sufis are a sound current. I call them a sound current tradition. He would, and Lakota people in a way, because all their ceremonies are so full of song, worshiping in song. So I met that sound current teacher and meditation teacher. He teaches Soul Transcendence meditation. And I was home. I knew I was home. It was the type of spiritual practice that rang in my heart, that I just connected with. There was so much love with him as a teacher. And I learned that, at least for me, having a teacher that's traveled the inner spiritual path and the path back to the heart of God is a shortcut. They have been awakened, enlightened, you might say, liberated on this earth. And they come and they teach. I don't know that it's necessary for every single person. It was necessary for me. And what I liked about John Roger is he didn't say, you have to do this my way. He always said, check it out. Here's what I know. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, fine. Check it out. And so I did check it out. And doing a practice of soul transcendence, spiritual practices, started to open an inner channel for me to hear and feel the flow of the celestial melodies, what in Hinduism is called the Nad, the Nam, in Judaism, the voice of the heart, it goes by many, many names, the divine melody. And by practicing that, opening your inner ears, right? We have inner ears, spiritual ears, like we have inner sight, spiritual sight. When we open our spiritual ears and embody the flow of energy from the heart of God and step into it like we step into a river, a gentle, warm river that takes us, the sound current, the celestial melodies, the Nod takes us on the spiritual journey back into an ineffable opening of loving, an opening of your eyes to see what is beyond this life, to know what is eternal, and to live in that internality and that wisdom of that while we're here living an ordinary everyday life. And so that's been my path for over 50 years. And I highly recommend it. It's brought all kinds of incredible adventures. It's brought amazing awarenesses and awakening. It helped me to realize the fulfillment of not squandering my life, becoming a better person, and I've got a long way to go on that, and ultimately learning deeper compassion from the spiritual heart, from the soul that we all have, and from the greater soul and spirit, that which created us. And that's where I came from. And so I wanted to just take a moment. And so I went from those days where I refuted God or stepped away and was in desolation and lost and doing stupid things and silly things and things that were not helpful or healthy, to the most beautiful life, a life way beyond that I could ever imagine. So I did come back to live on a ranch and have that experience of being in nature every day. I wake up and I see the mountains. I wake up and I'm on 10 acres. I hear the sound of the breeze. I have bears in my yard and I have horses. And I wanted to be the best person I could be. I knew I needed to learn compassion. I wanted to serve. And I wanted to make my fortune and be prosperous in life so I could share it with others and live a good life, because I was broke at one point. And I wanted to know myself as a spiritual being and as a child of God and as a person that loved God. And all that and way more has come to pass. So my life now is simple. It's beautiful life. I live the life that I've dreamed of, but more than I ever dreamed of. I've continued to travel around the world, and that was something I really loved and wanted to do in life. And I've served. I worked as a victim's advocate with the police department, and I learned that training so I could stand with people in their most challenging moments, a lot of death, assault, very challenging things. I've worked at a nursing home. I've worked with wild animals. I've rescued horses. I've rescued dogs and cats. I worked in the jail with women. And I've had a very creative life. And I had 2 careers. I had a great career in the film industry. And then I created another business, a residential rental business. And so all around, I've been prosperous. And I've had many tough times. I've had cancer, as I mentioned earlier in the previous writing, and got through it and understand that we're not given anything we can't handle. From that, I decided to, in this stage of my life, after 50 years of having a spiritual practice, practicing transcendent soul meditation and practicing the sound current of God, celestial melodies, the divine voice, I wanted to share it. Not as a teacher, but as a student who's traveled this path, and not as somebody who just was born awake and aware as some people are, but as somebody that has worked diligently doing spiritual practices, and that I could then pass on some of that knowledge. And so I'm doing that here on social media, and also in writing, and putting together a spiritual practice program that you can just plug into, because I've recorded those spiritual practices for you. Because people over the years had asked me, will you meditate with me? And I thought, no. And I always said no. I said no because it's a very personal thing. But people kept asking me, and people had a hard time sitting down, sitting still. And people kept saying, well, I need to quiet my mind. And that is not helpful to try to quiet your mind. So how to step into a spiritual life in everyday ordinary life, how to do your ordinary life and make it sacred and holy and expansive and joyful and deeply loving, how to make every challenge that comes your way an opportunity to grow and expand, how to have that attitude, that mindset, and to be grateful for all of it. And then how to know where we go after we drop these bodies, when we transition out of these bodies. What is our soul and our spirit? What is eternal with us? Who are we as an eternal being? And knowing that while you're still in this physical body. So you may have heard it before, but we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. We are spiritual beings embodied in a physical form for a relatively short amount of time. So let's make the most of this time and know spirit, know soul, know God while you're walking this earth, and then share in what that brings to you. And what knowing your soul, spirit, and God brings to you is love. It's loving, it's acceptance, which is the opposite of judgment or criticism or irritation, although we all have moments of that, unless you're a saint. But why not reach to be a saint? Why not have that intention? There have been many saints. They say that it's been said, a saint is someone who has seen the face of God and knows it. The face of God is all around us. Every creature, every mountain, every river, every deer, every bear, every bird, every eagle, every cloud has a spark of divinity. It has to. We're created from that. And we are created from love. And I'm saying this not because somebody's told me or it's theoretical, but having a spiritual practice has brought me the experience of that. And I wish that experience for everyone. When I was young and 5 years old and talking to Jesus about what my life was meant to be like and what I was meant to do here and what I was meant to learn here, I imagined a life where there was total peace. There was no more war, where people got along and loved each other, where there was joy and fulfillment, where we were all creative and lived in this creative flow. And I believe that is complete, that humanity, I know that humanity will one day evolve to that. I also know that what is happening now is meant to be and has always meant to be. The trials, the challenges, the diseases, the disturbances are the challenges that are part of the architecture of the blueprint of why souls come here. Because we many times learn through adversity, through challenge and hardship. We also learn from joy and fun and bliss and play, but we also learn through adversity. One time I had a vision. I was driving to a job, and when the job was over, I was driving home. It was about a 45-minute drive home. And I was talking to God about why was there so much misery on this planet? Why was there disease and pain and suffering and cruelty and abuse and hatred? Why couldn't it just be bliss and joy and fun and creativity? And what I heard as I was driving was, this is not heaven. Heaven is heaven. This is earth, and earth is meant for lessons, and it is meant for each person to learn and grow through their lessons. And the hardships bring the opportunities to grow bigger in your spirit and your soul. And I said, where am I now? Who's talking to me? Why am I hearing this? Where am I? And what I heard was, you are now awake. You are in the realm of awakening, where you are aware and awake of the great wisdom of creation. And I said, well, when I'm in my life, am I asleep? And the voice said, you have woken up. That's why you're hearing this. That's why you're having this experience. And you will fall asleep again when this conversation is over, but you'll never be fully asleep again. This awakening, this conversation, this will always be available to you, but you will get caught up in the world. And when you get caught up in the world and forget your soul and your spirit, you will have been drowsy for a while. You will have nodded off, but you will awaken again, and all humans will awaken. And I said, well, will this earth and the humans on it ever be at peace, ever be an easier life, a blissful life? And the voice said, one day, yes, because the earth is a consciousness, just like you have a consciousness. It's aware of itself. And it is making great sacrifices to be the foundation for the human souls to live on. And eventually, the earth will evolve to a place of ultimate peace. But now it's the earth, it's a place for challenge. And when the earth evolves for deep peace, there will be another planet for souls that are on the path to awaken will go. And it will have all the trials and challenges that the earth has. But for now, earth is the place for lessons, and heaven is heaven. And then I was back driving my car, and I'd been driving for about 40 minutes and didn't remember any of the driving, but I was very close to home. And then from that, though, I completely accepted my life and this life. And from that vision, I do get bothered and irritated about things sometimes, but not like I used to. So in this path of spiritual practice, there are visions that can come to you, awakenings, epiphanies, awarenesses. And my joy and my wish for every person and my wish for myself is to keep growing, to be more awake and aware all the time, and then to serve from that greater place of awakening and awareness. Because awakening awareness is basically just other words for loving, for caring, for compassion, and for oneness. So, how do you do it? How do you step on the path of awakening, of spiritual practice? First, you have your intention. And your intention is to be awake and aware, to expand your soul and your spirit, and to know yourself as a spiritual being living a physical life. And the way to do that is with a spiritual practice. Some people call it meditation. I call it spiritual practice because it can be in anything. You can practice your soul and your spirit, your awakening, your godliness as you're walking through life, in the grocery store, at work, getting ready for work, cooking, getting your meals ready. Everything you do in awakening and awareness. And when you're not awakened and aware, or breathing in the spirit and breathing out loving, that's okay. Eventually it becomes so automatic because you've practiced spiritual practices, spiritual transcendent meditation for so long. The spirit starts to meditate you. Soul starts to breathe you. And you and God have a partnership, and you live in oneness as much as you can. I hold myself to 80% of the time. I strive for 80% of the time. I'm human. I fall down. I make mistakes. I fall asleep. I doze off. I'm not even close to 100%. But sometimes I'm close to 80%, and I can claim that. So, number one, first step, have the intention for a spiritual life, to be the best person you can be, to awaken, to come into liberation, enlightenment, peace, compassion, understanding, cooperation, acceptance, and enthusiasm for it all. Enthusiasm with God for it all. Second, find a spiritual practice that works for you. It could be walking your dog. It could be going for a hike. It could be sitting by a river, an ocean, gazing at the clouds, being with your children, your grandparents, your best friends, being with yourself. Ultimately, taking some time for inner and outer stillness, listening to your heartbeat, letting your heartbeat, which is the sound current of the physical body, listening to its rhythm, feeling its rhythm, letting that rhythm take you farther, deeper through the channel that lifts you right through your body, mind, emotions, imagination, subconscious, unconscious, through a place that's like a void, through an opening gate into your soul, into your spirit, through your soul and spirit into the greater soul and spirit, and right back into the heart of God, where the symphony of sound, of music, of loving is always ringing, is always playing, and where your own song of loving joins with the symphony of creation, the breath of life, and you become one with it, still individual in your own individual melody, harmonizing with the great melody that comes from what the way God vibrationally creates, energetically creates, from non-form to form, from non-substance to substance, from nothingness to loving, and the form that loving takes. We individually are the form that loving takes. Each person you see is the form that love takes. Each part of the earth is the form that love takes. And when you begin to resonate and radiate that form and connect with it and attune with it in oneness, you are a blessing on this earth. You walk in holiness and sanctity, and you will know the joyfulness of creation and the eternalness of who you truly are. That is what a spiritual practice can bring to you. So you start with your intention. You move into a place of stillness. You listen to your heartbeat, and you open your spiritual ears to the eternal heartbeat of the universe, of creation. You let that take you back into the highest holy of holies, into the heart of God, and you rest there and know yourself there and know all creation there, and see the face of God for yourself. Not as a deity necessarily, although you can see the spiritual being that is the great spiritual being called God, but you also go through God into the oneness. This is how you have a spiritual life. And so try it. It's a practice. It's something you can practice a little bit each day. It doesn't have to take much time. And this is the great life that's available to everyone. What else do I have for you today? In conclusion, to sum it all up, I think in every heart of hearts, if you look deeply, maybe we've all had a vision of the trueness of existence, of the truth, the depth of existence. I think we've all maybe had a yearning of what is bigger than what I can see and feel and hear. What if I peeled back what I can see, feel, and hear? What is behind it? What has created this? And can I know it? And I would say to you, yes, you can know it. And you can walk in it as much as you'll allow yourself. And it starts with your wanting that. It starts with an intention, and it moves into a practice, an expansion, an awareness. And then that leads to a freedom. And this great freedom you will walk with in this planet and share with others. And there will be a prosperity and a bounty, no matter what befalls you in life. No matter if you're in prison, no matter if you're dealing with cancer, no matter if you have children that are having a hard time, no matter if the ones you love are transitioning and it pulls and it weighs heavy on your heart. No matter all of that, you can transcend it and experience all of that as a human and be walking above it. Jesus said, I am in the world, but not of it. You too can be in this world and know yourself as not of it. And that is what I wish for you. And I hope you'll consider a spiritual practice and moving into deep stillness to know your heart, your soul, to know the music of the courts of the Lord, and to know yourself as the divine being that you are and have always been. The blessings are abound. They abound. The blessings abound. They are always available, and you are the blessing. Namaste.